It's 1997, and Delwin Vriend and Murray Billett are posing for a photo. Murray is standing in a turtleneck and blazer, hands in his pockets, smiling, relaxed. Next to him is his friend Delwin, with newly bleached hair. It looks like a standard vacation shot. Except just to the left, in golden capital letters, are the words Supreme Court. A reminder that what's to come today is no vacation.
Before I even went into the courtroom, I went into the bathroom, and of course I didn't bring tissues, so I meant grabbing a whole wad of toilet paper because I knew I'd end up having tears rolling down my cheeks, so I just stuffed a bunch in my suit jacket pocket.
This fight started 6 years ago when Delwin was fired from his teaching job for being gay. Now he, Murray, and more than a dozen others are here to make the case that sexual orientation should be protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They enter the courtroom, and Murray takes it in. It's church-like. Wooden pews, red carpets, and 6 huge windows down the sides.
When we went in for the hearing that day, somebody somehow had gained entry and put religious pamphlets on every damn chair, and I was just fuming, like, what? Who would do this?
The pamphlets are from a group that has spoken out against gay rights, the Alberta Federation of Women United for Families.
I was disappointed and angry. Was I surprised? Not at all. I had the same stuff delivered to my house with stamps on it. So it's crap that I'd seen before, and I would just had to put up with it again.
Murray throws the pamphlets out. But for Doug Stollery, one of Delwin's lawyers, the pamphlets are a sobering reminder of what's at stake today.
If there were any doubt at all about the importance of the case, it was clear when we saw those pamphlets that it was critical that we were there to argue this case.
I'm Falen Johnson, and this is See You in Court, a podcast about the cases that changed Canada. This is Vriend in Alberta, Part 2. In our last episode, we met Delwin Vriend. He was fired for being gay and tries to file a complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission, only to be told sexual orientation is not protected under the law. Clare Bonnyman picks it up from Edmonton, where this court battle began.
So after 2 provincial court battles, Delwin's case has gone all the way to Canada's highest court. What people need to understand is that at this point in history, sexual orientation is still not a written part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Vriend team is asking the court to read in sexual orientation, basically to add it to the charter so that provinces can't discriminate against gays and lesbians. The Supreme Court has heard a gay rights case before called Egan and Canada. That fight over pension rights for same-sex couples happened a couple of years before this hearing, and the couple lost that case in a 5-4 vote. So while the Egan case didn't change anything for gay rights, it has given Delwin's legal team a window into how the court is thinking about these rights. And Sheila Greckle and Doug Stollery, Delwin's lawyers, see an opportunity.
4 of the judges found that wasn't even discriminatory. And one of the judges, Justice Sapinka, found that it was discriminatory and said, well, this whole area of gay rights is evolving, which led us to think that maybe in another case like ours, he might be amenable to finding a breach of the charter that was not saved by Section 1. What was needed was one more judge to come on side for us to succeed.
So Sapinka was your guy?
Sapinka was our guy.
Thank you, my lord. Good morning, my lords and my ladies. It is my privilege this morning to represent the appellant, Mr. Vriend, and the other groups before this court in their search for equality.
That's what it sounds like on November 4th, 1997, when Sheila Greckle stands to address the judges. You can hear a pin drop in the Supreme Court of Canada recording. And seated at the back of that room are Murray, Delwin, and Delwin's boyfriend, Andy. Delwin needs the support. After 6 years, he's tired of being in the headlines. They had a tough time in court before, so Murray is understandably nervous.
We were waiting for the questions. We were waiting for them to interrupt Sheila. Didn't happen. Delwin and I were kind of looking at each other and smiling, thumbs up. Are they actually getting it? It was cool. It was very cool.
Doug, who's co-counsel on the case, feels a sense of relief.
They all just sat there and listened very carefully. They took notes. They nodded. They were completely respectful. They asked a very limited number of very respectful questions.
This sounds like such a shift from their experience in Alberta, where a judge turned his chair around when they started presenting their case.
Yeah, they actually told me it felt like night and day. So, respectful judges, check. A binder full of notes and references, check. And more than a dozen interveners speaking on their behalf, big check.
I mean, this sounds like a really good sign for Delwin's team.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty stacked deck. And because of that, the team can start to relax as much as you can in the Supreme Court. They're ready for 2 days of hearings, and they have a plan, with plenty of time for Doug to write his closing arguments back at the hotel that night.
We thought, well, what we'll do is we won't prepare the closing argument in advance. We'll wait to see how the case is going, and after the first day, that we'll have a whole lot more information that'll help us decide what are the key elements in the closing argument.
But you know what they say about best-laid plans. After 3 hours of speakers in support of their case, Chief Justice Antonio Lemaire calls for a lunch break and does a little math.
My calculations here indicate that we should be finished somewhere around 4:35, so that you know that we intend to try to finish this case today. We'll adjourn till 2 o'clock.
Which meant that I was going to have to present the closing argument that we had not prepared at all. So if I wasn't nervous before, it certainly was then.
This immediately makes me think of high school, when the teacher says the essays due first thing tomorrow, and you thought it was like next week.
I went to theater school, and I still have nightmares that I don't know my lines and I have to go on stage. This feeling is, my palms are sweating.
So they're living this nightmare, right? And Sheila and Doug find this little couch in a quiet spot, and they have to figure out what to say.
Some members of our team went and got us sandwiches, and so we sat there and munched away at our sandwiches over the 1 hour that we had. And I frantically wrote out what I thought the argument should be so that I had something to present when it was my turn.
Do you remember what was on the sandwich?
I think it was probably ham and cheese, but I do remember that it was mustard because it ended up being mustard on the notes that I was reading from.
That's some solid sandwich reporting there, Claire. I appreciate that.
After lunch and these sandwiches, the legal team on the other side makes their case. John T. McCarthy is the lawyer representing Alberta. He shuffles over to the wooden podium, slides his binder full of notes under the mic, and begins. But 2.5 minutes into his statements, he's interrupted by the judges.
The tone changed when counsel for the government of Alberta started to argue. And it was clear that the judges of the Supreme Court of Canada had real difficulty with the arguments that were being made.
And what starts happening is surprising. At one moment, John McCarthy tries to show how some gays and lesbians did have some protection in Alberta.
However, let me give you an example of how they can access the Act. The Canadian AIDS Society has just used the example of the physical disability of the HIV/AIDS virus. And that, of course, is covered under the Act.
The judges seem to chastise him, playfully, perhaps. There's even laughter.
You have to get AIDS to get protection.
No, that's not my point. But
to hear those Supreme Court justices really understand it and show it that way, it's moving. It's powerful. It was delightful. It was delicious.
Doug is the last to speak that day with his mustard-stained closing arguments. He emphasizes that this fight is about more than one man who was fired. This is not about a job.
I would respectfully submit, my lords, my ladies, that if it's limited to employment-related sections, then we will have to wait for a lesbian to be denied accommodation and bring her case forward for that section. We will have to wait for a gay man to be denied access to a restaurant and bring that case forward.
You don't think the legislature will get the message?
My Lord, I respectfully submit that the Alberta legislature has made its position very clear. There is no particular reason to believe that the Alberta legislature will voluntarily take steps to deal with the other sections of the Act. Certainly there has been no suggestion by my learned friend that that would be the case.
And then it's over. The team has an extra day in Ottawa, so they explore the city. And it's a nice break, especially for Delwin, who by now is so well known in Edmonton he can barely get a cup of coffee without being stopped. When they board the flight back, Doug breathes a sigh of relief. His job as co-counsel is done, and there's a sense of joy when they get home.
Back at the Edmonton airport, and there was a little celebration at the airport, which was lovely. People came out with banners and things to celebrate the arguing of the case. And my then partner, now husband, came to pick me up, and as we were walking to the car at the airport, a really tough-looking guy came up to us and said, "Are you part of this gay case?" And I really did think that we were, about to be subject to some violence. And when I said that we were, the guy said, "Well, I'm with the Teamsters, and we're right behind you on this."
I think it's so telling that even when it was someone on their side, it was still that gay case.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even though there's so much support and acceptance even, the queer community is still considered an other to so many folks in Alberta and across Canada. But things at the Supreme Court went so well, the team is riding a kind of high. Even though you can never predict a decision, they keep thinking they just have to flip that one judge, Justice Sapinka, for a 5-4 win. And it feels very doable. Until
20 days after the hearing, Justice Sapinka died. And he was what we viewed as the swing vote in the case. And that only left 8 judges to make the decision. And when there is a tie in an appellate court like the Supreme Court of Canada, the appellant loses, and so we would lose the case.
It's early in the morning on April 2nd, 1998. It's been 5 months since the team appeared at the Supreme Court. The decision is due at 7:30 a.m. Edmonton time. They're gathering at Sheila's law office on the city's south side, where the Supreme Court will fax the decision because, it's the 90s. And there are nerves, to be sure, but also hope in the air when Murray notices that someone is missing.
We were waiting for Delwin and Andy to show up at 7:30. And unbeknownst to us, they were parked outside. And Delwin said, I can't do it.
At this point, Delwin is 31 years old and has spent years of his life fighting for the right not to be fired. And no matter what happens this morning, he is exhausted. Even with his friends and supporters inside, he can't bring himself to open the door.
That day was tough. That day was really tough for me. I did not want a decision because I knew that as soon as there was a decision, there would be more media. And I can remember not wanting to go into my lawyer's office that morning that we knew that the decision was coming down.
At 7:30, Sheila's fax machine goes off and spits out the decision. And they win. All 8 judges have ruled in their favor. And Doug thinks the way it's written is beautiful.
It is easy to say that everyone who is just like us is entitled to equality. Everyone finds it more difficult to say that those who are different from us in some way should have the same equality rights that we enjoy. Yet so soon as we say any enumerated or analogous group is less deserving and unworthy of equal protection and benefit of the law, all minorities and all of Canadian society are demeaned.
It's a recognition that equality is the basis on which we have founded our society. And it's a recognition of the fundamental importance of the Charter to all of us in Canada. The decision of the Supreme Court of Canada was like poetry.
The team celebrates, cheering and hugging, all while the person that started this is nowhere to be seen.
And I stood outside her door and I heard the cheers. I cried. I thought, oh, here it starts. Even though it's the start of the end, it starts again.
Despite his reluctance, this ruling pushes Delwin back in the spotlight. The Supreme Court reads in sexual orientation that morning, effectively rewriting the law in Alberta before breakfast. Later, a crowd gathers at the Alberta legislature, and a photographer snaps a picture of Delwin and his boyfriend kissing on the steps. And it's a long day of media.
After 7 years of legal battles, Alberta's gays and lesbians were celebrating on the steps of the provincial legislature this evening. Their hero, Delwin Vriend, arrived at his news conference to a standing ovation and delivered this message to Premier Ralph Klein.
Shame on you, Ralph Klein. Shame on you, Stockwell Day. You had until 7:45 this morning to do the right thing, and you demonstrated to the very end that you are not a government of the people, you are a government against the people. And I think they have a lot of soul-searching to do in that. And haha, I win.
That's the most haha, I win I've ever heard.
It's a lot of haha and a lot of win. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's interesting to hear because I've listened to so much news coverage from this time, and you don't get Delwin laughing a lot. But those 4 words clearly came straight from the heart, and they quickly become the headlines. Some call it kind of glib or maybe even inappropriate, given how big this case is. But for Murray, those words say everything.
The politicians in charge of our province were a bunch of schoolyard bullies. They picked on us. They didn't want to include us. They didn't want to meet with us. And it all just was so juvenile. And so when Delwin said that, I just about stood up and went, yes, you nailed it.
Still, there's something else in the news coverage. An official public campaign launches, calling on the government to invoke the notwithstanding clause.
Okay, and how would that work?
Basically, it's a clause that would let the province override certain charter protections, including things like equality rights.
So if their campaign works, the notwithstanding clause would negate the Supreme Court's decision in Alberta.
Yeah, it would be like this fight never happened. And in 1998, it's never been used before. Premier Ralph Klein said his view is they shouldn't use the notwithstanding clause, but the rest of his caucus is divided. And then the angry phone calls start.
Office of the Premier, good morning.
The campaign is organized by groups like the Family Action Coalition and the Alberta Federation of Women United for Families.
Right, and that's the same group that left those pamphlets in the Supreme Court on the day of the hearing.
Yeah, and they start pushing back against the Supreme Court decision just hours after it's released.
We've seen a pattern of judicial activism in Canada that is one-sided, kind of a left-wing agenda that has been pushed forward.
The homosexual community, as such, has enough liberties and rights and freedoms and power and money, not that they are not discriminated against.
Oh, there was so much going on. The level of hate was elevated. The backlash was even more than I expected. They did radio, TV, and print ads in the newspapers. They handed out cards in churches to have the parishioners send postcards to their MLA to tell them to invoke the charter and don't give those gays any kind of equality whatsoever.
In Edmonton, the only out gay city councillor receives death threats. Murray is on radio and TV debating some of these groups, and Doug is at a loss.
This was very dispiriting after all of the work that we had done. And after getting a unanimous decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, to think that we might, notwithstanding all of that we might lose. And that gays and lesbians in Alberta might not be entitled to basic fundamental human rights. That was very, very, very disturbing.
It has never been harder to be part of that gay case. And while the rights they were seeking are now official, it really doesn't feel safe to be queer in Alberta. In the end, the Alberta government doesn't bow to public pressure. 1 week after the Supreme Court lays down its ruling that sexual orientation should be protected in Alberta's Human Rights Act, Conservative Premier Ralph Klein announces the province will accept it and will not invoke the notwithstanding clause.
We have done the right thing relative to the Supreme Court decision. For this government, it was a giant step.
A giant step, one that's being applauded by gays and lesbians throughout the province.
The team has officially won, and Delwin can finally get away from this battle and the spotlight. He does an interview on CBC's As It Happens about the decision and whether he'll use it to try and get his job back at King's College.
What does it mean for you exactly? How is it going to change your life? Presumably it doesn't mean that you can walk into the school that fired you and start teaching there tomorrow.
No, it could mean that I can go to the Human Rights Commission and file a complaint now against the King's College. But I, in fact, will not be pursuing.
You're not going to file a complaint?
No, I will not be.
Why is that?
We have fought for 7 years to achieve what we've achieved today. I don't, at this point, feel that it's necessary for me to go against an institution that I think is small fish. It's just not worth it. It's been 7 years, and I think in many ways my battle is done.
Shortly after this decision, Delwin leaves. First just traveling, but he officially moves abroad in the early 2000s and lands in Paris, France. And he never moves back to Edmonton. Given all that he saw in those years, Murray's really not surprised.
I know it was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life. Imagine having your name on every newspaper in Canada and a lot around the world. To have your name a household name. To have people reach out that you don't even know and start calling you and your family all kinds of horrible things. And that's why he left the country. And I didn't blame him a bit. I mean,
This case led to legalizing same-sex marriage in Canada and broke down other barriers for the 2S LGBTQ+ community. The Edmonton school that fired Delwin for being gay, King's College, now called the King's University, actually put an inclusivity policy in place in 2018, making them one of, if not the only, religious post-secondary school in Canada to explicitly mention sexual and gender minorities as a supported group. I spoke to the current president, Melanie Humphreys, and she said without question they were on the wrong side of history in this case, and they're working to reconcile that. And by the way, I did reach out to the government of Alberta for its reflections back on this case. I didn't get a response by our deadline. But Doug told me the impact of Vriend in Alberta goes way beyond Canada.
In India and South Africa, Barbados, Mauritius, Belize, the Vriend decision has been cited by their courts in striking down the laws that criminalized same-sex relationships. And so that has impacted the lives of a very large number of people around the world.
Through the years, Delwin has come back to Edmonton, visiting family, and he speaks on this experience. And he's back in town for the 10th anniversary of this case in 2008, when he sits down with the local CBC morning show and shares how much the media coverage sucked for him.
Dealing with media and being in front of cameras was definitely something that took a lot of energy. And, there were times when I just thought, I can't deal with this. Please make it all go away. I think I'm glad that I saw it through, but that was the biggest thing, I think.
He was part of a documentary and podcast series that came out in 2024 and has been interviewed for articles, but not a ton. And then 30-ish years later, after this fight, he gets contacted by another journalist, me. And I'll be honest, knowing what I've learned about Delwin's experience, I felt weird reaching out for yet another interview. But I sent him an email, and it took a while, and I heard back. In the end, Delwin said he did not want to be interviewed for this podcast. And as you've heard throughout these episodes, he's already done so much talking. He told me he's not interested in rehashing old stories that do not lead us to changing society for the better.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think it makes sense. It can be easy to look back on this story as some wild ride from the 90s. But today, while we know that human rights cases can be won, we also know that laws can be changed with the stroke of a pen. Fights that take years can all be undone. And so I think for Delwin and Murray and Doug, there's a sense that you can never stop fighting.
We've seen legislation and policies in a number of provinces in Canada restricting the rights of gender minorities. We've certainly seen restrictions on equity and inclusion and diversity in the United States. We're starting to see some of that in Canada now. So all of these are areas where reinforces for us the importance of fighting for human rights.
There's this phrase Murray kept repeating when we were speaking for this story. Discrimination hinders coming out.
But coming out hinders discrimination.
I think that might be part of the legacy of this case, that so many people like Delwin came out to their families, to their workplaces, to their friends, and more people understood that they know and love someone who is queer and joined the fight against discrimination. This legal battle made coming out easier to do in a lot of ways, and it is something Murray thinks is becoming essential to do once again.
I mean, we still have people getting fired for being gay, being picked on, gay bashed. The discrimination's still going on. Legislation doesn't change the heart, it just stops the heartless. Is it better today? Yes, it is. Are we done yet? No, we're not done yet. We will never be done.
This case obviously changed Canada. It changed Delwin, his legal team, and his friends and supporters. How is it for you being immersed in this case?
You know, I've been sitting with this story for a while, diving pretty deep into the 90s, and I think I'm mostly struck by just how recent all of this is. And as a young queer person, or even just a young Canadian, I think it's a really important reminder to not take things for granted. Because when change happens that makes our lives better or more equal, someone or something is always paying for that change. And sometimes the price is really steep.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Falen.
Want to get brunch?
Hell yeah.
If you liked hearing Delwin's story, you should check out next week's episode. It's about a man who got a piece of mail promising him hundreds of thousands of dollars, but when it didn't deliver, he took it to court. And it's a wild ride. Please help spread the word about See You in Court. The best way is to share it with a friend, someone who's interested in stories like this, stories that help define Canada. The show is hosted and produced by me, Falen Johnson. Clare Bonnyman wrote and reported this episode. Sam McNulty is our sound designer. Catherine Rolfson is our senior producer. And Carla Hilton is our executive producer. Special thanks to the Edmonton Queer History Project for their archive collection. Also to the Supreme Court of Canada for use of its webcast recordings. And to Greg Kelly for additional voice work.